So it's a pleasure to be here. I actually think I gave a slightly longer title, but maybe I didn't. It was the benefits, the seen and unseen benefits of bats to humans. And part of the unseen is not only that they occur at night, but that they also occur very, very high in the sky. All right, so let's start. People who live here, so like people who live in Tennessee, we think of bats, we think of creatures like this, okay? They're relatively small, they all eat insects. There are 15 species of bat in Tennessee, okay? 15 different species of bats. The largest of them weighs about an ounce, okay? The rest are smaller. But if you go worldwide, there's an enormous diversity of bats. All told, worldwide, we're still adding new ones. We're at about 1,400. So 1,400 different species. They eat enormous diversity of things. We have fruit bats, we have insect bats, we have carnivorous bats, we have bats that eat pollen. You can see the diversity of faces here of these animals. They range in size from half a gram to 2 kilograms. Largest bat in the world has a wingspan of about the same as mine, about 2 meters. So, 1,400 species. This is about a quarter, a little over a quarter of all mammal species. So there's a great diversity of ecologies, mating systems, and what they do. When we start thinking about the benefits of bats, there are three big things that come in. First of all is pollination. Mostly tropical bats. A large number of our bats do pollinate. They eat nectar, and in eating the nectar, they pass pollen from plant to plant. The pollination syndrome is common among many desert plants in particular, but also many tropical plants. Agaves are pollinated by bats. Tequila, there's now a movement towards bat-friendly tequila. There are over 500 plant species pollinated by bats. And these include climax forest trees in the tropics, capox tree, giant silk cotton tree, but also bananas, mangoes, guava, durian, and cacao. So chocolate. Okay, these are bat-pollinated plants. So we have a lot to be thankful for bats for that. Thanks, bats. These are pollinating bats with their faces covered in pollen. Okay. Also, appropriate for the seed. Also, seed dispersal. There's a large number of frugivorous bats. Okay, of these 1,400 species of bats, about 3/4 of them eat insects, and the rest frugivorous or pollinating bats, nectar-eating bats. And bats are well known as dispersers of seeds. Because they're bolin, that is, they fly long distances, they carry the seeds or they poop out the seeds. And they've been demonstrated to be important, very important, in dispersal of large numbers of seeds, particularly a lot of secondary plants, succession of plants. Piper, also for ecosystem integrity, figs are incredibly important for not only bats, but for all sorts of other animals that live in tropical forests. So very important to the integrity of tropical forests. That's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about insect-eating bats. I'm going to talk about the work that we've been doing in recent years on insect-eating bats. And again, about 3/4 of the bats that eat exclusively or largely a diet of insects. And the way bats do this, we'll play this again. What you're seeing here is a bat. Can we turn the light off for just a second? We'll play it again. So what you're seeing here is the bat facing the insect. You see the insect, and here's the diagram. And You hear that? You hear the crunch? Okay, we'll go back to it now. Okay, so here's the bat that I spent most of my career working on, the Brazilian or Mexican free-tail bat with a moth. I'll tell you what it is. It's a tornado moth in its mouth. Now, the way these bats find these moths is they fly at night looking for these moths with echolocation, with their sound. And they emit these high-frequency sounds as they're searching for and approaching the insect. So there's the insect, there's the bat, there's the trap on the left. So as they approach the insect, they detect the insect with their echolocation. They, as they get closer and closer, they emit the calls more frequently, and just before they actually strike the insect, you hear a very, very short, rapid repetition of calls called a feeding buzz, and that usually spells the demise of an insect. There we go. These high-frequency echolocation calls travel relatively short distances. High-frequency sound does not transmit a long distance in air, so a few tens of meters at most. Okay? A few tens of meters at most, depending on the frequencies. Now, my lab, we've been working on bats and their interactions with insects with the central hypothesis. And our hypothesis is that bats go to insects. We've been working on bats that travel at very high altitudes. They go very high in the sky, and we have been using a variety of techniques to study the activity of the bats at these high altitudes. And here we have a kite balloon, a helium-filled kite with an insect net, and also, though you can't see it, we have a bat detector, an ultrasonic detector that detects the hunting calls of the bats attached to this device. Okay? And most of this work takes place in south central Texas. What do we know about the insects aloft? Well, we've been working on this for a long time, but a really important paper was just published at the end of last year by a colleague who we're working with in Texas, actually, on mass seasonal bioflows of high-flying insect migrants. Okay? And this is using the latest radar technology to actually measure the numbers, the volume and numbers of insects that are going over our heads every day and night. And this is over the United Kingdom. They're estimating approximately 3.5 trillion insects, or 3,200 tons of biomass as the annual flux over the UK. And the UK is not a particularly diverse or rich, biologically rich country, rich place. For perspective, this is 8 times the total biomass of the 30 million migratory songbirds that move annually from the UK to Africa. Okay. So, for another perspective, there is a greater diversity and biomass of animals migrating in the lower atmosphere that walks on the surface of the Earth. Okay. And most of this diversity and biomass is insects. It also includes migratory birds and migratory bats. These insects travel hundreds of meters above the ground. They travel day and night. And this has been studied using a vertical-looking radar, VLR radar, which we have positioned right now in south central Texas. These insect migrations occur globally, including over Texas, which is where we do most of our work. And you also see them with the normal Doppler radars, billions of insects, huge amount of biomass, hundreds to thousands of meters above the ground. And what we're seeing here is 9 o'clock in the evening. This is southern Texas. An emergence an hour later, and emerging. These are insects. Insects emerging from the lower Rio Grande Valley in Mexico and migrating north. And the bats that I work on in central Texas, this is not rocket science. We have billions of insects and millions of bats, and they interact at high altitudes. And these are bats emerging from one of these very large caves in south central Texas, the Brio Cave. This is the bat. This is the bat that I work on, and Brazilian or Mexican free-tailed bat. This is what they do. These bats fly. Oh, he's going to say goodbye in a minute. We had a paper published last year demonstrating that these bats are flying faster than any other vertebrate. They are capable of flying. Their maximum flight speed that we've documented is 100 miles an hour. 45 meters a second. That beats the so-called swifts. They also fly at altitudes of up to 3,000 meters above the ground. We have evidence of their, well, let's do this. Let's show the thing. It's so cool. And we have recorded feeding activity by these bats as far as we've been able to get our ultrasonic detectors, which is at this date about 1,100 meters above the ground. We knew there was a lot happening early on. The next red Doppler radar, this is a Doppler radar in central Texas near San Antonio. It sees these bats every night, clear nights, leaving the cave and going to altitudes, as I said, of up to maybe 10,000 feet or 3,000 meters and dispersing across the landscape. This is where we work. This is a big agricultural region where we estimate the value of the bats. These are all caves. Here's the radar. This is the radar. These are all big caves. And this is just the bats emerging from the caves on a clear night. Here's Austin right here. This is central Texas, multi-county region. The bats dispersing over hundreds of kilometers over the landscape. So they fly at 100 miles an hour and they travel well over 100 kilometers from their cave in a given evening. And then we've published a bunch of papers starting back in the mid-2000s. Linking the activity of these bats to migratory insect populations. And I think we've well documented both the insect and bat movements aloft and the bats linking to migratory insect movements. And again, huge numbers of insects. A variety of different techniques. We use the Doppler radar, the vertical looking radar, balloons, we capture insects aloft, we listen to bats, and importantly, we look at we extract DNA from bat feces, from bat poop. We can recover the DNA of the insects that a bat is eating from its feces, from its fecal material. Okay, and we can identify those insects to species. We focused a lot of our work on corn earworms, also known as the cotton bollworm. Depends on which plant it's infesting. If it's corn, it's a corn earworm. If it's cotton, it's a cotton bollworm. If it's eating tomatoes, it's a tomato budworm. They are the #1 agricultural pest in America. Over $1 billion of damage and pesticide control costs annually from this one insect. Using our fecal DNA and collecting bats, we have tracked the seasonal consumption. This is the proportion of bats, individuals that have corn earworm DNA in their feces. That is 8 corn earworms that night. And we've tracked the abundance of the insects. Okay, and this is the seasonal abundance of the insects. Starting March through September, local moths, migrants arrive from the south, a drop in the mid-season, next generation, all migrations, sharp peaks, dramatic differences in the availability of these moths and the presence of these moths across the landscape. And then we track the bat's diet and the moth abundances, and these correlations are incredibly good. Okay, so we know that these bats rely heavily on these moths. We've now used more sophisticated, new metabarcoding, sequencing sequencing techniques, and we've documented the DNA of at least 21 migratory species of migratory insects and 44 species of pests, insect pests, in the diets of these bats. Okay. This is what we see before and after migration events. Okay, this is before the migration event. This is after the migration event. This 9 grams, 19 grams. Okay. These bats rely heavily, enormously on these migration events for foods. Not just corn earworms, but this whole assembly of migratory insects. And we've collaborated with economists, the modeling group here at UT, fabulous modeling group here at UT, to actually evaluate what these bats are doing for us in terms of these consumption. Okay. So actually putting a dollar value on these on the bats in terms of their what they're contributing in avoided costs from crop damage and the use of pesticides. And our models indicate just this 9-county region in Texas that we've looked at. Our models indicate that the insect eating services of bats have an average annual value to the Texas cotton growers of about $93 per hectare in crops, just this one crop, or about $74,000 in total savings. This is the average value. It ranges from a couple $100,000 to over $1 million. This is about 12% of the market value of the cotton crop. Okay? And we've done this with a variety of different approaches towards determining the economics. We've extrapolated from this to evaluate the annual value of bats across the continental United States. And this was done by a postdoctoral associate of mine, looking at the average value of bats to U.S. agriculture. And there's a big range here, but somewhere between $3.7 to $53 billion U.S. dollars in terms of the average annual value. And we've looked at every county for which we could get data across the continental U.S. Now, that's one species of bat. That's one species of bat from which we then extrapolated to a small portion of the total community of bats. And as I started, we have this enormous diversity of bats when we look across the world. And most bats are tropical. And our work was the first study to actually put an economic value on the services that bats are performing. But there have now been a whole host of other researchers who have established the value of bats to other crops and also to the value of bats in tropical regions. And there's now there are papers coming out almost monthly on this. Documenting not only the contributions of bats in terms of dollars, but this paper here, bat pest control contributes to food security in Thailand, protecting the rice crop and contributing to food security. Pest control services providing ecosystem integrity and values to tropical agroforestry. So this is one of the most, documenting these services has become one of the most cogent arguments for bat conservation. And of course, we're very concerned with the conservation of bats. So with that, I'm going to stop. And lots of room for questions, I think, Mark? And,
absolutely.
And thanks to a few people here. Faster than I thought I would. Yeah, sure.
You say back to the beginning, bats may roam 100 kilometers
Yeah.
or so?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that takes a lot of energy. So how much insects are they?
Good question. Good question. Yeah. So we have looked at the energetic expenditures of our free-tailed bats and the energetic content of the insects that they're eating. And it varies across the year, but somewhere between 1/3 to 2/3 of their body weight in insects every night that they must consume. And their peak energetic demands are, at least for the females, are during reproduction, during the lactation
That
period.
would be higher for them?
Oh, it's much higher, yeah. Yeah, it's 2/3 of their body weight during lactation. Yeah, so what this then translates into is if you look at one of these colonies that has, well, these caves do have, say, 1 million bats, that translates into 1,000 tons of insects being eaten every night. So it's a lot. And that was one of the things that we wondered about early on, was where do all these bats get all this energy? And the answer is they go up there and it comes to them.
Is that for most bats or just some of the species?
That's just some of the species. There are bats that are feeding all through the air column. There are other species that don't. These are some of the on-scene bats. Yeah.
So what is the current status of white nose syndrome?
Funny you should ask. So, does everybody know what white nose syndrome is? Okay.
Can you refresh us?
Refresh you. It is a fungal disease. It's a fungus. It is now called Pseudogymnocaccus destructans. It's related to a common soil fungus. It's a cold-growing fungus, which infests bats in temperate regions when they hibernate. So when the bats go into hibernation, as for example in this region, they drop their body temperatures and they shut down, pretty much shut down physiologically, including shutting down their immune system. And this fungus grows on them during hibernation. It's called, why is it called white nose syndrome? It's called white nose syndrome because it was first detected, on the muzzles of the bats, but it grows on the ears, it grows on the wings, it grows, it basically invades the bat when the bat is hibernating. And I know probably most of you know that fungal infections are really bad things, and they're particularly bad for animals, humans, cancer patients, AIDS patients, people that are immunocompromised. So when a bat is hibernating, it's immunocompromised. And this fungus invades them, it grows on them during the hibernation, and then when the animal comes out of hibernation, and they raise their body temperature, and their immune system kicks back in, they have this foreign invasive fungus that's in their tissues, and their body attacks it. And that causes an erosion of the wing membranes, it causes a whole host of physiological problems. also, while they're hibernating with the fungus, while they're hibernating and get infested with the fungus, it apparently irritates them enough, or for some reason they come out of hibernation more frequently than they normally would. Now, in a normal situation, a bat, a hibernating bat, will spontaneously wake up every couple of weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks. If they're infested with the fungus, they wake up 2 to 3 times more frequently, consuming energy. The result has been that large numbers of our hibernating bats have died.
How long do they hibernate for at a time?
Depends on where you are. So here's a map showing the spring. You see, I kind of anticipated the question. I've anticipated another one too, so we'll see. It's an introduced fungus. It's a classic example of an invasive species, a species that was introduced to this continent, to a naive fauna by us. Okay? And it was introduced in 2006. Well, it was first discovered in 2006. Okay, so it may have been introduced shortly before that. It was first found in a single cave, the epicenter, it's Howe's Cavern near Albany, New York. And since that time, and basically what people saw these white noses, and then they also saw large numbers of dead bats below the roost. Since that time, it spread north, south, and west. And this is the most recent map, at least the most recent map that I have, which is as of August 7th of this year, showing where white nose syndrome has been documented. It came into East Tennessee in 2010. We were waiting for it. It took a couple of years to get hold, but 2012 was a really, really cold winter, and we lost a lot of our bats. One species of bat, the northern long-eared bat, has now been put on the U.S. endangered species list. Not as endangered, unfortunately, but as threatened. Probably should be endangered. And several other species have declined precipitously. The Myotis lucifugus, the common mouse-eared bat, 90-some% in infected areas is gone. The Indiana bat, which was already on the endangered species list, has been seriously depredated. The pipistrelle, the common pipistrelle or Paramyotis, largely dispersed. Other bats are surviving. Okay? So that's white nose. Yeah.
I got here a little late, but did you show a projection of the population of bats in the areas where we grow crops? The southeast, the southwest, and the midwest. And if they're, are they fairly uniformly spread around so that they're everywhere where crops grow?
No, I did show a map, and I can show it to you again if you wish. I did show a map. It was a large-scale map showing our estimated value of bats, what bats are contributing. In Tennessee, we're we're relatively at the low end of that value. Texas is mid-high, really big value in California.
That number for the cotton got my attention, and that works out to be 8 cents a pound for a pound of cotton, which sells.
Good for you.
And I doubt if you can find any farmer in the United States that knows that.
Who knows that? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good.
So what is the status of, because I know in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park that one or more of the caves are closed because of white nose and so forth, trying to protect the bats. What's the status kind of in the park and in this area of bats?
Well, as I said, white nose came in here in 2010. We had a couple mild winters. I'm always on the optimistic side. I was thinking, well, we're far enough south that the winters are shorter, the hibernation season isn't as long. Maybe we've reached the break point for this cold growing fungus, and I was sort of hoping that it's not going to come much farther south. But We had a couple of cold winters, and we lost almost all. So White Oak Sink, White Oak Blowhole, was the largest colony of Indiana bats in the state, had estimated 8,000. I don't think there's any there now, or maybe a few. So it's been largely deprecated. Yeah?
One more. How many years of research does what you presented today represent?
I first started working on free-tailed bats in 1981. Okay, it was right after I got here. I was doing a very different sets of projects.
36 years.
For very different sets of projects in '81. And then we started this work. We started the ecosystem services and the high altitude foraging work in '95.
How are researchers like you sharing? How are researchers like you sharing the research information you get? Is there a national group that meets periodically?
Well, funny you should ask about that.
That's a good segue. I was gonna pave the way for that. You did a good job there, Robert.
We just hosted the North American Symposium on Bat Research here in Knoxville last week. Well, the week before, it was October 18th to 21st that we hosted the North American Symposium. We had about 370 people here talking about bat research. We have an annual meeting. NASBR's an annual meeting. It cycles. It was called North American, so it technically includes Mexico and Canada, but it also includes all parts of the world. We had people here from China, from Taiwan, and lots of people from Europe. So it's the largest international bat conference in the world, except for when we have every 5 years we have the international meeting. This is my student Melchizedek. He won the best paper award at the meeting.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Yes?
The white nose syndrome. I know in the paper I've read that there's been concern about cavers spreading the disease. But
Oh, yeah.
with the spread as large as you're showing here, a lot of that has to be just natural exchange.
Yeah. So, we don't know how it actually first got here, except that Howe's Cavern is a commercial cave that has 100,000 people visiting it annually from all over the world. We do know, I'm going to get to your question, okay? We do know that the same fungus, the identical fungus, is widespread throughout Europe, where it does not kill bats. It infects bats. They may have some minor tissue erosion, but they don't die. It doesn't kill bats. We also know from genome analysis that it's the same fungus. We don't know quite where it's from. We were all hoping it was the French. It looks like it might have been the Germans, but it was almost certainly brought by somebody. We also know that if someone goes into a white nose infected cave, they come out, their shoes, clothing, backpacks, whatever else are infected. So it can be transmitted and carried. There's a very active cave community. People like to go into caves, and we've been very, very concerned, particularly in the early stages when it was located here, that it would all of a sudden show up over here.
Yeah, right.
And we actually did have very early on a transmission event to Oklahoma. Now we don't know for sure if those were humans, but if you look at the logs of these avid cavers, they move all over. So we put a moratorium on humans entering infected caves. It is being dispersed by the bats. The fungus is being dispersed by the bats. There's no question about it. But we can't control the bats. We control what we can't control. So almost all of this spread is almost certainly from bats, but there may be long distance jumps. The bats, when they get infected, they groom themselves, and then they poop out fungal spores that can self-destruct. So, and these caves that are now infected are environmental reservoirs. The fungus is there.
Is there any way to kill it?
There have been a number of people who have looked at and are now looking at ways where we might try to control it and do some. I mean, right now, the only protocol that we have is to try to quell the spread, which is to try to keep people from moving back and forth. But there are some agents, naturally occurring agents, that will kill the fungus in a petri dish. But what else will they kill if you put them in a cave? So there are people who are looking at ways, spray something on bats, that sort of thing. Right now, we're trusting for the bats to take care of it. And in fact, we have some glimmers of hope that the bats, maybe some bats are recovering. And as I said before, the European bats, they probably had their white nose crisis before they were recorded by humans.
That was my question. Have they developed immunity, the European bats?
Yes.
Sounds like the chestnut blight.
Yes. It's very much like the chestnut blight. Yes, it's very much like the chestnut blight. Or how many others do we want to talk about?
Yeah, really.
So, so they have the lab experiments have been done, cross-infecting with European strain and European bats. European bats have an inherent immunity. We are now seeing individuals, Melky maybe can speak to this too, we are seeing individuals in some of the early infected areas where there are still bats hanging on. We still have infected species. They have not gone to total extinction. And I think there's a good chance that they may be taken care of. We may lose some bats. We have lost a lot of bats. We've lost millions of bats.
One always associates bats with caves, but the flying fox in Australia, I've seen islands and rivers where there's thousands of them in the daytime hanging upside down. What's the story? And of course you've got some areas up there that don't look like they have too many caves. So what happens to them when they don't have caves? What happens when they're in the light all the time?
So on this continent, the types of bats we have, if they're not in caves, they're in trees, tree hollows, in open foliage, or in buildings. And a lot of bats that used to roost in large, mature, hollow trees have now taken up residence in buildings. So we have a lot of building bats. So when we come up into these areas, a lot of these, there's not karst regions, and bats are in other locations.
Is there any sort of, how do they accommodate when they're there in the daylight in a tropical area, like North Queensland, for example?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you see large numbers of bats hanging out in broad daylight.
Yeah.
Yeah, close their eyes.
You can smell them.
Oh yeah.
From a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile.
Oh yeah. You can smell one of these caves from a good long distance. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So, getting back to the economic value of the bats, so what's being done with that? Is the agricultural community interested in that information?
They seem to be very interested in this information.
Should we all be trying to attract bats?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of interest in this, and I've only talked about a little bit of it. Where there's been several projects where, particularly with high value crops, things like pecans, orchard crops, where growers have attracted bats to their orchards by setting up bat houses and documented a decrease in infestation rate by insects. So our experience in Texas, so a lot of my work was my work on the Texas bats and the ecosystem services has been done with the USDA and with USDA researchers in Texas, and we would do farm days where we would outreach to the growers and magnificent support. So it's just a matter of educating, and I think this whole thing about how much the bats are actually worth is really gaining a lot of traction. Now, personally, in a way, I don't really like the idea that we have to put a dollar value on something in order to make a motivation for protecting it at all, but we'll take it. Yeah, whatever it takes.
Speaking of bat houses, do those ones that you see like in the wildlife stores where they have the bird houses and the butterfly houses and the bat houses, do those bat houses really attract bats?
Some do. Some do, yeah. There are some bat houses I wouldn't put up. But if the bat house is well designed, which means it's big enough,
Yeah.
and maybe some multi-chambers so that it has enough diversity,
Yeah.
they do work. And they work better in some parts of the country than others. They do work here. I've never had any in mine, but they do. But there are people here who have been very successful with bat houses, and in other parts of the country, lots of bats in bat houses. They do work. Mark.
One brief question, one little bit bigger question. One is the 100 miles an hour that they can fly at. Is that in a dive or is that straight line?
You're going to compare them to stooping falcon? A rock can fly that fast. That's gravity assisted. That's not flying.
Okay.
It's horizontal.
Wow.
It's horizontal.
That's very impressive.
It's very fast.
So that sort of leads into the bigger question is, people have for ages been predisposed to hate bats. Has that changed in recent times by other than you? Do you find a lot of prejudice against bats in the general public?
What do you think, Malky?
I think it changed through the years. There's more information out right now, so that people have more knowledge about bats, and that make a difference, especially in the schools. They're teaching now their bats and teaching about them, and that make a difference when you're growing up. So I think it's been changing, but still there are a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I think this sort of thing, the ecosystem services, also a lot of the pictures I showed were taken by Malky and other really skilled photographers, showing what they really, how cool they really are, helps a lot. There's some organizations, Bat Conservation International is the largest nonprofit devoted to the conservation of bats. I'm on the board of Bat Conservation International, and they've done a magnificent job in publicizing. I mean, you know, we want people to think of bats the way they think of whales and dolphins. And we're working with that. Yes.
That leads into the question about, I've never been to the bridge in San Antonio where I heard a lecture that attracted all these bats, and now some places are trying to get bridges, other places like that. Is anywhere in Tennessee, are we doing that in Tennessee too, to build bridges that would attract them?
No, not intentionally, though Texas Department of Transportation does have a program to where they are building bat-friendly bridges. The big bridge that you're talking about is in Austin, Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin. But there's another one in Houston, and there are really a lot of them all over Texas. And they have building bat-friendly bridges, which are basically concrete box beam bridges that have gaps about like this wide, and the bats go up and roost up in those gaps. And because the top of them is usually covered with black asphalt, they're nice and warm and attractive to the bats. So, but there's no such program like that in Tennessee.
Is there a way to promote that?
You know, is it a good idea or not? I'm not entirely sure, because the bats that are in those bridges are subjected to widely varying temperatures. and also they oftentimes get run over. So I think it's good, but is it, I'm not 100% sure. Yes?
Are the range of bats changing now that economy's changing? Are their ranges expanding?
Yeah. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we have a paper that's not quite yet in press. Still got a couple of reviewer comments, but the bat that I've just been talking about, the Mexican freetail, Brazilian freetail bat, I've been here, as Mark said, I've been in Knoxville on faculty for 38 years, and I've been called out innumerable times looking for freetail bats. Someone telling me that there's freetail bats here. They never were. The farthest north they were until 2008 was central Georgia. In 2008, we got reports of them in western North Carolina, and since 2008, we've been monitoring the movement of these bats down into the valley, and they are now all over the place. And we attribute that to climate change. And perhaps loss of habitat because the loss of other bat species from white nose.
So is that affecting other bat species?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Moving in and taking their insects?
The bats that are not being impacted by the disease, and there are some, the tree bats, for example, the migratory species, are not being impacted because they're not hibernating. These species are increasing in relative numbers, in relative abundance.
Yeah. Are bats not susceptible to pesticides? Like you said, they eat the bugs that eat the crops, and bugs are always changing, so they become immune to the pesticide. But then should they have a residue on them? Does that not kill off the bats when they eat them?
Yes. Back in the DDT era, the era when we used chlorinated hydrocarbon pesticides, there was huge depredations of bat populations. The DDT accumulated in fat. The bats passed the pesticide, the poison, on to their young in milk. The milk is very fatty. We probably lost huge numbers of bats in the DDT era, just like we lost lots of birds too, eggshell thinning and all of that. The new pesticides, many of the new pesticides are not accumulate, they don't accumulate like that, but if they get topical, a lot of them are neurotoxins, so if they actually get applied to the bat, so if, and a lot of, like part of our outreach in these big agricultural regions where they spray with airplanes, is they like to spray just before dark.
Yes, because the air is still.
Because the air is still, this is when the bats are coming out. So and if they actually spray on the bats, they will kill large numbers of bats. And there's some evidence of this having occurred. Yeah, it's a real problem.
I was going to ask if you would be willing or able to provide bat habitat. I mean, you indicated there are ways we could construct, or that there are like bat, something we could add. Like I have a little acre and a half, and I've always felt guilty. I've taken out some trees that I'm sure probably had little bat hollows and things in them. How do I replace that? Or are there any links on the bat association websites or anything for recommended designs?
Yes, definitely. If you go to BATCon, BATCon conservation.org, that's the website for bat conservation. And they have bat house builders guidelines. They have guidelines to bat houses. I anticipated two other questions that I haven't gotten. Yes.
What are the two other questions you
Other things that kill bats. The dark side of wind energy. Okay, the dark side of alternative energy. The wind power companies are largely unregulated. They're building wherever they feel, typically on private property. They build wherever they can convince people to lease them property, and they build them in really bad spots. So last year, we worked with a wind company and Bat Conservation International and defeated a wind power project, a multi-turbine project that was going to be built 13 miles from a maternity rooster for the Mexican free-tailed bats. There's no regulation. I'm not opposed to wind energy, but definitely opposed to wind energy in the wrong spot. And so that's a major.
What was the other question?
What's happened in the transgenic era? So I'm talking about bats eating insects that infest corn, cotton, and other crops, and we now have transgenic cotton, transgenic corn, Monsanto, innovation, collaboration, speed. So what they're doing is what these big biotech firms are doing is putting genes from bacteria that produce insecticides into the tissues of the plants. So the corn earworm, poor little corn earworm, who's unlucky enough to lay its egg on a BT corn or cotton crop, the egg will turn into a larvae, the larvae will chomp on it, and the larvae will die. Okay, so there's been a major transition in agricultural systems. In this country, let's see what the next slide shows. Not that one. I was going to show you the spread. Oh, I said I didn't put it in. I didn't anticipate where I was going to go with this. But in any event, there's been a major transition in agriculture, certainly in this country and really worldwide. There are some areas that do not allow this stuff, but it's really common here. The area that we're working in Texas, when I started working there in 1995, BT wasn't there. Now, 95% of the cotton grown in that region is transgenic. So anyway, so we've modeled it out, and we're working along some ideas. We've modeled out. The first thing to say is that although this they engineer the pesticides into the tissues of the plant, it's not. Maybe other people here know something about this technology, but it's not 100% effective. It's only partially effective. So even with the BT crops, they're still spraying. They're still applying pesticides. And the other thing is that so we've actually had a paper published on this on whether or not the manufactured capital of how much money is put into transgenic development of transgenic crops, what it's doing to bats. We see bats as being natural capital. Bats are natural capital. BT as a manufactured capital. And we've looked at what's happened with the value of bats from 1996 here until 2008. And we see that the manufactured capital has replaced about 50% of the value of the bats. Okay.
What's the vertical axis?
Ecosystem value of Mexican free-tailed bats. Ecosystem value here, and percent replacement of...
The heavy black line, I can't see it from back here, but the heavy black line
is the mean scenario.
The degradation of the bat population.
It's not the degradation of the bat population, it's the loss of the value that the bat is contributing to the growing.
But how much is that affecting the bat's population?
Yeah, that's a question that we've been really looking at. We were really concerned about the loss of bat populations, but we haven't seen any decrease in the actual numbers of bats that we can attribute to this. But here's what we're working on. So this paper was published in 2013 or 14. What's happening as we approach 1 billion acres? Now we've got 1 billion acres planted with BT crops. And I say Monsanto's business plan. What Monsanto's business plan is they construct new constructs. They go and find new genes and they put them in, and that costs millions of dollars and takes about 5 years. And what they're doing is trying to fight resistance, because the insects are developing resistance to BT crops. And that's happening. We're seeing that all across this country, and every place where they're planting lots of BT crops, the insects have evolved resistance. This is just showing evolved resistance from, so DDT was introduced just after the Second World War, then a bunch of other pesticides in, and this is showing the numbers of resistant species to normal insecticides. Resistance evolves, and it will evolve, and it's evolving with the BT. And here's showing evolved resistance to BT. Okay, so this is, BT was introduced in '96. This is 2011. These are the resistant species. So lots of resistance, or resistance is evolving multiple times. So here's the model. This is what we're working on here. It's not 100% effective. Maybe the new construct kills 90% of the insects, but 10% live, okay? Those 10% that live, that insect, that survivor, survives as an adult to get eaten by a bat, okay? So what we're saying is that by retaining our indigenous native predators, we are basically retarding, slowing down the evolution of pesticide resistance. So we're still saving, and this is the ecosystem value that no one's really looked at through evaluator modeling.
But that's a losing game, because insects and all these species evolve tremendously faster.
They do, tremendously faster.
And I
Yeah.
don't think we can keep up.
Well, so.
Well, I'm terribly sorry to cut things off. Maybe people can stay for a moment, those who can, but I know some people have to get off to classes. Thank you for a terrific